How many board games can you think of that feature respectful presentation of adult women on the boxes? How about women of color? Welcome to Gaining Advantage. Welcome to Gaining Advantage. We're using tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons to help you make lives better. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, we have an upcoming Kickstarter that's called Ready to Roll, Play with Other Friends, and it's only going to be $1 for the whole adventure. This is the Ready to Roll series. This is the first of the series, and the idea is that these are going to be games, adventures that when everybody cancels and you've got you go, well, all I've got is one player and one DM, and what are we going to do? Because this is not what I prepped or anything. That you can pick this up and use it as is. It's all ready to go. It has extra help with it so that you don't have to spend a lot of time on prep or anything. You just pick it up and use it as is, and it's set up to be used for any level character, one or two players with one DM. And so this is also the first tabletop role-playing game product ever released that includes digital Braille format at launch, right? It's also the first to include Braille at all. But we are hoping to help the rest of the role-playing game industry to follow that example. So encourage you, check the link in the show notes, follow the Kickstarter to get notified when it launches. So now, on with our interview. In today's episode, we are honored to have Dr. Tanya Pobuda, an expert in the field of board games and gender representation. Dr. Pobuda's groundbreaking research sheds light on the often overlooked aspects of gender and racial representation within the contemporary board gaming community and industry, including game designers, representation in artwork, and gaming culture, and how to make the gaming space more welcoming for everyone. Welcome, Dr. Pobuda.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so happy to get this invitation.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here. So tell us, what would you like us to know about you personally, specifically speaking to the tabletop gaming crowd?
Yeah, 100%. So I have been board gaming since like the 70s. I'm totally old. And I had my first love, or one of my first loves in board gaming was, and I grew up in the middle of nowhere, literally in the very far north of Canada. So all we had were books and board games, and it was really just my sister and I in a really like isolated farm. My first really deep love was with the board game Masterpiece, and I was convinced I was going to be like an art historian as a result of that, playing that game and trading artworks. And I was one of the obnoxious people who decided that I was going to read every book and memorize every Trivial Pursuit card so that I could win every game. And I really liked board games and still do because socializing is really hard. And I really like the stylized way you can kind of get to know someone with rules. And there's a type of communication that happens in board gaming, and it feels really good. I really always feel so good when I play a board game. And I've been just in love with them for all the years of my life and decades now. So I decided to, in a very convoluted roundabout way, become a board game scholar. I can get into that in a bit, but I wrote an entire PhD dissertation about board games and gender and racial and sexual orientation and ability dynamics and how that can kind of play on a community and give invitations of welcome or exclusion. So that's the big idea with my dissertation.
That's fascinating. All right, so tell us more about how does all this work with inclusive gaming, how you got there, and where you arrived at.
Yeah, totally. I decided to go back to school because I had this weird craving to go back to school. It was a really really interesting thing. I did a lot of work in high tech and life sciences, and I had this like extensive career. I was a tech reporter, Years and years ago, I met Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and I was a very early personal computing tech reporter. And I just had this craving to go back to school. My daughter was going back to school, so just to completely embarrass her, I followed not to the same university, but I decided I wanted to go back to school. I went to Toronto Metropolitan University, and there was a joint program with York University. Decided to do my PhD. Was going all the way down a road to building weird virtual reality chatbots to basically have conversations, difficult conversations in the workplace. So I created chatbots that would bully you in 3D. And then I realized the research was kind of derivative. Virtual reality was so elitist, it was so expensive. And at the same time, I was hanging out in board game shops all around the Toronto area. And my partner and I were almost always there, like maybe 5 days of the week, we were hanging out in board game shops. And I started to realize, like, I'm the only woman here sometimes, most of the time. There's an interesting, like, feeling in the stores. It was very white. We went everywhere, like all kinds of different board game places. So yeah, we were hanging out in board game shops, and I noticed they were very white. They were very male. There was a uh, certain feeling in some of the shops, and I started to think, like, why is that? Why is it so very white and male in so many different places that I go to? Why it doesn't feel as welcoming as it might, and how does that play out in terms of the hobby? Like, how does the hobby get bigger? How does it expand when there are, certain limitations to different identities, maybe accessing those spaces and maybe accessing the games themselves? And I started to wonder, and there was actually a social media debate that was happening, and I started to look for research to answer the question. What kind of representation is there? Because I used to work in marketing. What's kind of, is there an invitation on the box? Boxes in, I used to write box copy for products. There's an invitation often in the way that the boxes are, executed, the layout. I used to think a lot about, like, what kind of photos would we use? What kind of artwork would we use on different products to welcome people in? How would we use copy? How would we talk about things in, like, rule books and or manuals? And how do we invite people in, both in terms of, like, artwork and who gets to design board games was the other big question that I had. And I couldn't find that research anywhere. And I started to dig into it and realized, with a dissertation, a PhD dissertation, your research has to be novel. It has to be something that nobody else has really discussed before. And so I thought, there's something here. So I pitched a small scale study to Analog Game Studies. Shout out to them. Analog Game Studies journal online. They're terrific, and they were able to publish my first piece, and it kind of blew up a little bit in the sense that there was a ton of interest. Lots of people very angry at the fact that, why would you even bother studying this? Who cares? It's just a game. All the tropes we've heard before.
Yep.
And lots of mean comments, by the way. And I felt really strongly that there was something here. So I decided to abandon my VR research and all my coding, and move on to this discussion. And what I was able to find was, from an artwork perspective, the invitation wasn't really there. Right, there wasn't a lot of women. I think I had a stat that I used, which was, you're more likely to see an alien, a creature that doesn't exist, than a human woman. In the research that I conducted, a fairly large scale as part of my dissertation, and you're more likely to see a picture of a bird than a woman of color. And it was really, really upsetting to see that there was that sort of clear decision, and it's not necessarily. I understand how systems work in marketing, how products come together. Having worked in that space for years and years, it's not always an intentional decision, right? You have this image in your head of an imagined audience, and you think you're making a product for a certain kind of audience, and sometimes that just implicitly gets in the way. You're sort of on autopilot, and you think, maybe it's just white guys, maybe it's just white middle-aged guys, maybe it's just white middle-aged guys that are in the suburbs, right? And if you start to build all of your products that way, then all of the ways in which those products are constructed kind of privilege a certain identity and exclude others, right?
Hmm.
And I also wanted to surround that representation study, how many women, who is designing these games, it's like who writes the books and what do the covers look like? Similar kind of research, but with board games. And what I discovered was overwhelmingly, the games that were the most popular in a hobby context were designed by white males, like at a like 96.5% or 96.2%. And that all said something to me, but that's not enough to know that. Then you have to ask people, like, how does that make you feel? So I went out and tried to find diverse board gamers to say, okay, how does that make you feel? What do you think about that? And a lot of people came back and said that it does matter to them. They're sort of making do. They're not, they're saying, well, it's what we got. It's very similar to television and film studies. You make do with a lack of representation, and you can find yourself reflected in like narrow ways. And I was talking about this the other day with my partner. In the 90s or 80s, like there was just mostly rom-coms, and women were always falling over their pumps. And it was so depressing to me as a woman, because it was like I wish I could see a woman not being incompetent on the screen.
Hmm.
And then suddenly there is now a lot to choose from, where it's like women are capable and they're helping themselves, and they're not just screaming, falling over on their pumps, and becoming an impediment to being rescued, by being chased by the dinosaur. So yeah, so I wanted to get a real picture of, like, what does this do to the hobby, and does it stultify and stunt it? And the answer was kind of yes, that people were sort of tolerating it and, love it despite itself, which is not a great thing for any sector to have happen.
Yeah. No, I first became aware of this myself, um, being a white guy, a straight white guy, and all that. It's like, oh well, the stuff is all made for me. So thanks to my privilege, I don't notice it,
Yeah.
right? And my wife and I were watching the show Blackish,
Yes.
and he mentioned cereal box mascots, and he's
Mhm.
like, we have Count Chocula, and I was like, really? And so I started researching. I went, wow, there are no people of color as cereal box mascots. And then I went, wait a minute. Also, there's no women.
Exactly.
And in fact, there was just within the past like year, there was finally one which was actually a derivative of another one, but it was like, wow, I'd never noticed this before, but this is ridiculous. And then I thought, I saw some of your work, and I thought, wait, board game mascots, and I just went, oh, wow. I never noticed this, that
Yeah.
if you see women on a board game box, unless it's something like Clue, where you've got this sort of dinner party setting, or something like that, where you have this wide range of people, or else it's kids. Um, and that's the only other time that you'll
Right.
see, you would see a little girl, but just seeing like a woman, or something like that, that it's not specifically like a couples thing or something like that. Like you will see a woman alone on a box.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, or you'll see, the blonde, the brunette, and the redhead, and they're
Mm.
sort of there, and they're kind of there to, be like male gaze kind of objects, right? And
Charlie's Angels.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right, and that's a trope you see a lot. Once you
Mhm.
once you notice that, you can't stop noticing it. Um, so yeah, it was a really, really interesting, fascinating study, and I find that, again, from my background in corporations, sometimes numbers tell a story better for a certain type of audience than anecdotes, right? And one of the things I always found when I was working with like senior leaders who are very overwhelmingly white and male is, if you can tell a story with numbers, then people start to realize, oh, that's a pattern. And the pattern was pretty undeniable here. Just a couple of examples, just quickly. Um, the fascinating thing is it is so extremely systemic. So, for example, there were 647 masculine images, so presenting as male, as a man or a boy, and 195 of feminine images in like rule books. So I did a structured analysis of rule books as well. And the other really interesting thing is with the cover art was quite a bit worse. Um, with cover art from a racial perspective, 82.5% of all artwork on the 200 Board Game Geek ranked games that I looked at, and these were sort of the top tier games you've all heard of and played. 82.5% were white presenting, and only 17.5% were Black, Indigenous, person of color. And again, that sort of overarching kind of, I had to sit there and catalog almost 2,000 images. Had a really structured process I had to use. I had to get all of that checked, working with other coders. And that 17.5% is so dramatically low when you think about the audiences of North America. And let's focus on Canada and the US, which is where my research is mostly seated. Um, most most cities, major centers, large purchasers, major consumer hubs in North America are 50-50, right? 50% Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and 50% white. So as a marketer, I'm thinking, what are you doing? Why
Hmm.
would you do that? Because again, that the box is an invitation, just like you said, the cereal boxes, you make sort of split second purchasing decisions when you can see yourself reflected in a product. And for board games, I don't think I've seen numbers like these since like the 80s, the 90s, like early 90s. And it was almost like going back in time a little bit to a much more sort of archaic era and seeing that kind of lack of representation. And the numbers were a little bit better, but still horrible with regard to men versus women. 76.8%, so a little less than 77% of the images on the board games were men, and 23.2% were women. And that's really interesting to me as well, because a lot of studies, and I go into great depth in my dissertation, women make a lot of purchase decisions, particularly around things like entertainment. And that seemed a maladaptive approach, again, from a marketing perspective, for board game publishers to make these kinds of decisions. And I didn't even get into um, the the negative and positive representation, because a lot of the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color representation was not positive, nor was the representation of women. Women were very sexualized on a lot of board game artwork. You've got battle mages who are wearing low cut pointy nightgowns.
Hmm.
So it doesn't make a ton of sense. And again, it's a very male gazy kind of thing. And I also did a lot of structured interviews with people about, how does the artwork make you feel? How do you feel about it? And I got a lot of really rich perspectives from very diehard board gamers who are women. And they said, it does make me feel a bit weird. If I'm playing with people I don't know and I'm playing something like Mage Knight, it does make me feel like, this character's clad all in leather and she's very sexualized, and is everyone okay?
Hmm.
Group, like, is someone going to make a snide joke, right? And it does make them feel a little unease, and it's that making do again, where you feel like, okay, well, I'm doing it, I love this game, but it just gives me a little bit of pause. Maybe when you're in a board game basement with a bunch of people and you're the only woman there, and suddenly you're playing artwork that makes you feel a bit funny. So
Hmm.
yeah, and so and it was really really interesting to get the feedback from the board game community. And I actually heard from a number of publishers who were like, we're going to do better. And it made me feel really, really good. That there was some traction with this, and it made me feel like this research, is important to continue doing. I'm going to I know this is just audio, but I wanted to do a little quick shout out because this made me actually burst into tears. I love sharing this. This is my favorite thing. So, Clarence Simpson, I have 4 copies of this on my shelf because it made me cry. He wrote, because of Tanya's work and my own personal experiences, I was determined to prominently feature a Black woman on the cover of my upcoming game. Thankfully, my publisher obliged. So, to your really good point, Dale, like it's odd to see like a woman alone on a game. Here is a terrific example, the exception by far, but just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And look how beautiful this artwork is. It's Merchants of Magic. It's a game by Clarence Simpson, and it actually, when I got this tweet, I just cried happy tears for quite some time. So it really made me feel good.
That's fantastic. And yeah, that's the stuff where you go, yeah, it was worth it. It was my work is making a difference and stuff like that. Yeah, it's the stuff you live for.
Yeah. Oh my God. And I got a great, just a shout out. Everyone should follow Our Family Plays Games. I get to contribute every so often, a bunch of times a year, to Starla, Mick, and Grant Fitch's great channel, Our Family Plays Games. And I get to provide some of my research. It's literally the only place you can find my research right now because I've been shopping around a manuscript of my dissertation. Nobody wants it, which is unfortunate. I'm actually thinking I'm just going to give it away online because forget it. Because there's some really interesting research, and the people who shared their stories with me in my work, people should see it. Like I'm so lucky that I got so many responses back from the community, and Board Game Geek, shout out to them. Mostly Board Game Geek users got back to me and told me these amazing stories about their experiences, and many of them made me cry too, happy tears, and also, hard stories about inclusion.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you seen? I mean, you mentioned this one example. Have you seen other changes in the industry? I mean, I think back and I think of, like your sort of old classic games. You have the Monopoly Man, of course, is kind of the quintessential, white privilege, everything. But and people don't get that when Monopoly was designed, like he was actually supposed to be like a caricature. He was supposed to be the villain.
Yeah.
um, and but games like Clue that have just it's a hey, you've got gender representation, but they're all white. And so have you seen improvements in that?
It's really kind of heartbreaking. Just a small tale of woe. So I have, it was initial real pickup of some of the research, lots of like events, and I got invited to a bunch of things, and I just can't find the funding to continue this work, and it's really heartbreaking. So I had to get a day job because, unless you're completely independently wealthy, you cannot do academic research. May I just tell you? So I'm teaching like science and healthcare courses at a couple of local colleges. It's amazing. I love it so much. And I'm an instructional designer, so I make pretty games for people to learn from. And it's, my life is full circle. Masterpiece taught me in the 70s or early 80s, and now I get to make little games for people to learn, and it's really, really fun. But there isn't a lot of money. There isn't a lot of, so I've actually, Our Family Plays Games, and I have applied for some grant funding to try and get something going on this topic because I'd like to relaunch my research and refresh my data set because the research that I did was in 2021, and I would like to see what's going on now, right? And so we've pitched and pitched and pitched, and nobody is that interested because I think, is my supposition, that the diversity, equity, and inclusion in the discourse and popular culture, people have kind of wandered off from it, and people have, in fact, it's even worse than that. I think they've said, well, thank good that crisis is over. It's all over. We're good. Everything back to normal. And in fact, things have backslid even more. So it's worse than ever. And so I think the money and the interest in supporting this kind of work, I was actually completely shocked that you asked me to do this because nobody's that interested anymore. And I, again, like I had some quiet conversations with publishers, and they were very happy to, make sympathetic noises, but then they were kind of wandered off. So yeah, I think we're not seeing a lot of progress. And I know people told me that when I started doing the research, like, yeah, people have tried this. Like, and I look at stuff even from the 70s. There was one piece that I included in my dissertation. I was like, this could have been written right now. It was written in 1971. And we're not making a ton of progress. And in fact, we're losing some ground, even, if I may say. So it is a little sad making. And I think that there was a little dust up on X, formerly Twitter, the other day, and it made me think, like, yeah, we're not making progress here. Like, and I was kind of waiting out to say, no, games are political. Like, everything that we make is, right? Everything is shaped by what we know. And so if you have, you don't have a disability, you're going to design something, and you don't know anyone with a disability. You're going to design something that is kind of oblivious to that lived experience. And I watched that all the time when I was working in software and even when I was working in instructional design, where people were like, yeah, too bad if it's hard, like, literally. And I remember thinking, like, how does that help you sell things? And I was forever always telling my clients, like, you want to open up a bit. You want to, like, bring more people up, like, bigger tent, more money. Like, don't you like making money? And that was always
Exactly.
heartbreaking to me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so weird and frustrating. Yeah, the fact that, like, okay, so you're excluding,
Mhm.
uh, this huge group of people that have money and make purchasing decisions, and stuff. It's like, don't you want to kind of invite them to give you their money? Um, I mean, and you talk about this sort of bounce back.
Yeah.
I was recently listening to an interview, just with some in Hollywood, that when it comes to choosing TV shows and things like that, that the sort of prevailing attitude among people making decisions about what shows end up getting the green light and ending up on TV, are sort of going, well, yeah, we did the inclusion and diversity thing, and so check, done, and now we can go. It's like, no, 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 that's not the point. And and so, yeah, there's sort of this attitude that, like, oh yeah, we took care of racism and sexism, and like, they're all done. Like,
Oh,
no.
it's it's actually incredibly, and there's studies to prove it. And I got a little frustrated the other day. I started a TikTok account, just because it was more to embarrass my daughter, I think, because I'm, again, totally old and she's 26. Um, and one of the reasons I did was I got so tired of hearing this, diversity doesn't sell, that horrible expression, go woke, go broke, and the numbers don't bear that out. So,
Nope.
for example, if you put a woman of color in the lead of family films, and actually Gina Davis, she has a foundation, a research think tank. That Gina Davis, the Mensa, and I think she's, what is it? What's that called? She's shooting and cross country skiing. I forget. She's an Olympic champion,
Oh,
as well as being
definitely.
a beautiful, famous actress.
Mm.
She decided to do some structured research, some very high level market research about whether or not women in film, and they have some amazing studies, like, that you're going to make about 17 to 19% more revenue if you put a woman of color in the lead of a family film, for example. You're going to lose, and this is a different study, that I was really struck by, something in the order of $380 million. And you're going to lose 80% of your box office opening if your film does not include authentically diverse representation. So if you've got, a black character in your film who's completely stereotypical, and he dies in the first, or she dies, or they die in the first few scenes,
Mhm.
no one's going to go and see that movie, or they're going to walk out, or they're going to ask for their money back, and you're going to lose 80% of your total film budget in opening weekend. And this great research team did this structured analysis and found that the opposite is true. Diversity does sell. And I'm actually just going to pop open a couple of these numbers because I want to remember. Yeah, 19% more revenue is earned by an organization that has a diverse management team because they make better decisions. And the reason you want diversity on your teams, as an example, and this is something I saw working corporately for clients in a bunch of different sectors, is you're going to know, hey, you're designing a product that excludes disabled people, people with disabilities. Hey, this is not going to appeal to women. So maybe fix this, fix that, fix the other thing.
Mhm.
You're going to make $21 million more if you put a person of color in the lead. You're going to make you're going to make gross 20 million more than you would have if you had a white lead character who was not a woman. So and again, this it was 32.2 million dollars in losses in a film without that authentically diverse representation. So the opposite is true. And I think that, we're backsliding. There's a lot of sort of retrograde thinking happening right now. The reality is the numbers are there. The structured analysis has been done. The verdict is in. And the more you include, the more money you make. And what I find really fascinating, just as a sort of hobby horse of mine, is what I noticed in corporate boardrooms when I used to advise CEOs and senior executives. I used to work in a number of large multinationals. Is sometimes ideology is way stronger. Certain misunderstandings about cultures, certain misunderstandings about women, or cultural groups or identities, that is always almost often stronger in those kinds of discussions than the profit motive. So I was at a conference once, and we both kind of came. It was a co-presenter and I were like, ideology is way more powerful than capitalism, in the sense that you will make decisions if you have this kind of power, and you're not really curious about the world, that cost you money over and over and over again. I'm a project manager. I'm a registered project manager as well. And there's a stat that we always talk about in project management, which is like 95% of projects fail. They do. Companies go under. And it's often because they have these really huge misunderstandings about the world. They're not curious about other people. They make things for themselves. They don't solicit advice. They don't get diversity of perspective. They just lose money and they go under, right? And I really think that the board game publisher, the sector, is making some really, really poor decisions, which I feel are rooted in some of these misunderstandings about inclusion. So that's my rant.
Yeah. No, I I can't agree with you more. And I think it's really important to say it, that that because the flip side of this, of what you're saying, is that ideology aside, you want to make money. Yeah. Like, don't exclude potential customers. And and yeah, there's that whole thing about being able to identify with characters in in whatever form of media you're consuming, um that if you can identify with the character on some level, the more you can, the more you're going to be a fan of that, the more you're going to put money toward that, and and stuff. And and that's purely from just a selfish, greedy kind of standpoint. All right. But then, like, if you actually care about making the world a better place, and improving people's lives, and um, the other part of that is, hey, like, the world works better if we care about each other, and we pay attention to each other, and like, you're better off uh, um, if by being kind, um, than you would be by being completely greedy and selfish. So it's like, uh, you can do the greedy and selfish angle to make money, or you can be kind. Either way, inclusion and representation and authentic representation is to your advantage.
Yeah, I have the great privilege of collaborating with a number of Indigenous educators, And one of the things that they've taught me is communities, how we survive. Like, we were just rewatching my partner and I Lost the other day, and it was like, live together, die alone, right? If you band together, you live, right? But if you decide to wander off on your own, radical individualism, you'll die alone, right? And that's the idea. And learning about like indigenous communities and learning about how these massive megacities that existed in Ontario, where I live, how they had these incredibly sophisticated trading systems and trash collection, and they were multicultural, and they were huge megacities. The Huron-Wendat community, as an example, I was privileged to work on a project, and the idea that the only way you survive as a species, as a community, is banding together, and that every single person it was a strength-based culture, so it's like what you're good at, and you bring everybody in because it keeps you alive, and it helps you flourish. And these communities flourished, right? And with sophistication and science and crafting that you would not believe. Like it very similar to, just with a complete little aside, very similar to like kimono making or samurai sword making. The Iroquois cultures had this real protocol around pottery, and how you basically had to become a master. You had to work for at least 8 years before you were able to touch a certain type of pottery, and you had to really demonstrate this incredible skill. And the idea there is, when you're building product, you're making a game, you have to think about community. You have to bring people in. And I watch some publishers and I think, you're just making stuff for yourself and your friends, you know? And I also, I don't have time because I'm teaching so many courses, but I have a couple of like half-started research pieces, one on the cull. There's this wonderful trend I'm observing on YouTube and other social media platforms, where white couples mostly are getting rid of their board game collections because they're literally running out of room. And I keep thinking, you've got a saturated market, and you've got people who are literally saying, "God, no more. I can't take another big box game, and I don't need more miniatures. My partner is going to leave me if I bring one of more
Mhm.
of these boxes into the house." And people are running out of room and donating their collections, and it actually breaks my heart because I'm worried that we'll have to do that at some point too. But we're a saturated market, white, middle-aged people who live in the suburbs. Like my partner and I are kind of that epicenter, and I can see it. And how can a board game publisher survive if we're your only target audience? Your market's saturated. And I wrote a big rant, which I can definitely send out a link to, about that. The same kind of dynamic I saw in personal computing is happening now in board games, where it's like this misapprobation that it's only this type of identity that cares about board games. But we're saturated. So where do you go now? Anyway.
Yeah. All right. So you just rescued a genie from the hands of an Ifriti. It offers you 3 wishes to achieve your goals to make the world better. What do you wish for?
I thought a lot about this awesome question. And one of the things I've been thinking lately is, I wish, and I know there's all kinds of reasons why this isn't the case, but I wish that people were more open-minded to learning new things. And I thought about the answer a lot. I actually was watching this. I was listening to this podcast about, it was Dr. Steve Hassan, who is an expert on cults, and he was making this really interesting neurological argument that we're often on automatic. His argument was this: we're on automatic for most of our days. There's a certain routine that you set, you kind of don't think about it, and you just got to go about your day. And we're mostly on automatic. He said we're biological organisms, and we kind of create algorithms for ourselves, and we just sort of go through the day. And there's all sorts of really good reasons why that is. What I've noticed is people are not super willing, for lots of good reasons, to take in new data and be okay with change. And I think a lot about change management in my other jobs. And so what I've noticed lately is there might be new facts on the ground, and people are like, nope, doesn't fit the sort of autopilot algorithm that I've set up for myself during my day. I'm not taking in any, my brain is full. I know what I'm doing. And people are not agile and open-minded enough. And I see this in a lot of, I saw this in the business world. I see it playing out in communities all around me where people are not able to take in that new information. Like, the world is changing. We have to be adaptable to it. Progress is how we also stay alive. And I wish people could take in new data in a way that allows them to shift and progress a little bit more. And what I've noticed is there's a real reaction to some new bit of information. Forget about it. That can't possibly be true, right? And so, yeah, I wish people were a little bit more open. And there's all sorts of systemic reasons why that isn't the case. So I'm not blaming anyone necessarily, but I wish people could shift out of that automatic mode and take in new data.
Yeah. Okay. Any other wishes besides that?
So that will unleash, I believe, a whole bunch of things. I wish that not a single person in the world would go hungry. I wish for world peace. I think all of these things would flow from that. I wish that, and I also really believe that nobody, I think the philosophy that anyone thinks they're better than somebody else is gotta go. I have no snobbery. And let me tell you, I used to be like very, very scared of PhDs. And now I realize, oh, wait, nobody who has a PhD is any better than anybody else. Nobody that has any kind of expertise is any better than anybody else. If we could get rid of hierarchies in communities of any kind, I think that would be such a wonderful thing, because nobody's any better than anybody else. It just means that I've gotten the chance to spend more time with a topic, and I get to do that research. I have the privilege to be able to do that research, but I really wish that people didn't have the hierarchies and the snobberies and the gatekeeping, because it happens in academia just like it happens in game stores. So.
Yeah. Right. No, it absolutely right. That, yeah, it's the one thing leads to another and to another, and so yeah, the willingness to learn and to change and adapt, kind of important from a growth and development standpoint. But yeah, it's hard.
Yep.
All right. So, what one message would you like to give women and other underrepresented people who are interested in gaming?
There was a quote I love so much, and for this reason alone, actually, I popped it into my dissertation because I loved it so much. And it was actually at my defense. I think I told the individual who told me this quote or shared this with me. Um, this woman approached me anonymously through Board Game Geek, and she let me know who she was, but I can't attribute. Um, and she's a racialized woman, and she said, sometimes I I don't leave the room. So her thing was, it's hard, but I don't leave the room. And sometimes that's all we have. And the idea here, and it really resonated with me, because I knew when I was working in tech environments with like senior engineers and computer scientists, and when I was working in life sciences with like PhDs and senior physicists, it was really uncomfortable to be in those spaces. I was really, really uncomfortable. But I had something I had to convey to them because I had an expertise that they needed. And no matter how uncomfortable that space was, because I decided not to leave those rooms, I think I shifted perception. And, you know, that idea of like, it shouldn't have to be, but stay strong and try to affect change where you can. And I know it's really, really uncomfortable. I mean, I had a situation not too long ago where I was part of an academic group, and it was so uncomfortable and so unwelcoming, but I just wanted to stick with it to show that, I could handle it, that and I shifted the perception because I just sort of dug in, because obstinacy is my superpower.
Mhm.
And I was able to sort of shape and change that group. So that's it. But yeah, don't, sometimes it can be really, really hard. And I think it's unfortunate that we have this burden, but you have to speak up. You have to try and, don't leave the room. Stick with it and try to remake your hobby in the way that you hope it might someday be.
Yeah. Oh, and that's hard too. All right, what one message would you like to give to gamers who want to make their gaming spaces more welcoming to everyone?
Yeah, I actually I just finished a lecture for a course that I'm teaching on healthcare, and I invoke Captain Jean-Luc Picard a ton because it's sort of a management philosophy I love, 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 and it's the idea that options, please. I super love consultative, low power distance, which means no one's above anybody else. I liked being a manager that way. When I was a corporate director, I was always like, "Tell me what you think. Like, if you think of what I'm saying is idiotic, please let me know." I want options. I want everyone to have the psychological safety to speak up and tell me what you'd like to see change. And it created some uncomfortable conversations, no doubt. But if you're, hosting a game event or you're, trying to create a community, like checking in with people and saying, options, like, what do you think? What does everybody think around the table? I adore that. And I think, with Star Trek: The Next Generation, it was one of the first times I saw like a management style like that, and I adored it. And I thought, that's it, right? Bring as many voices as you can into something, and you're going to have you're going to have an amazing community. And sometimes it's a lot of work, but my God, the results get it pays dividends tenfold, 20-fold. And so bringing everybody in, trying to even when it's uncomfortable, like reshaping things, being agile, bringing in new information, don't be a gatekeeper. Listen to folks because sometimes you'll be surprised. People, the not real, that's not a real game conversation is probably the worst thing humanity has ever invented. Whenever I hear someone say, that's not a real X, whatever it is, I
Mhm.
think, oh, you've just demonstrated that you're blinkered, and you're not being that sort of openness and agility that we need to progress. So be like Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Options, please. That's it.
All right. So, any projects that you're working on right now that you can talk about? You've kind of hinted about some.
Yeah, what our family plays games voices is please follow them. They deserve 3 times the number of followers, subscribers they have on YouTube. They're amazing. They've been kind enough to let me sort of repost some of my gaming research on my channel, and I'm trying to get some energy and activity around, maybe doing a next phase of my research, refreshing my data set because there's so much goodness there, and I want to give the community back the stuff they gave me through my research. I'm still debating what I'm going to do with my dissertation because it's now I can do whatever I want with it. It's not my libraries anymore, my university libraries, and I'm thinking maybe I give it away for free or I make a video series on the entire dissertation because some of the stories are just spectacular. So
All right. So, we'll have all your contact information in our show notes. But where is the one best place that you'd like people to start to learn more about you or to contact you?
that's a great question. Well, they can probably find me on X, which is at Pobuda, Pobuda, Tanya, Tanya. And from there, there's a jumping off point to I share my YouTube videos on there. And I do have a YouTube channel as well, which is just TPOBUDA.
All right. Well, Penny, thanks so much for coming on the show. Everyone, check out those links in the show notes. Tanya, thanks so much for coming on our show. It's just a really great time. I really appreciate the work and the research that's done, and I hope really to see more of that in the future. There's just so many things that many of us are unaware of and need to be pointed out. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show about Braille, and I thought, wow, it's 2024, and there are no Braille tabletop role playing games. There's been some people have done some conversions for local organizations and things, but none of them have ever actually been published that way. And so we're trying to do something about that, starting with digital Braille, and so hope that you'll support that. And just support in general more inclusivity and accessibility in tabletop role playing games so everybody can play. All right. But there are a lot of people that are supporting that. And a huge shout out to all of our patrons that help us on a monthly basis to continue our work to make this space more inclusive and more inviting and more accessible. And we have a new patron, Brian Gustafson. Thank you so much, Brian, for your support. We so appreciate our patrons. And we have also added Foundry VTT support, and we're converting all of our products to Foundry. And if you follow our Patreon at least the $5 a month level, you get access to all of our Foundry products as they're released and whatever we already have there. And also, speaking of accessibility, our products also have audio, narrative audio, for those who benefit from that. And that's also something that nobody else does that we'd really like to see more of. So really love it if anyone, if you support us so that we can continue to do that and encourage the rest of the industry to follow that example. Thanks to our patrons, we've also added community copies to our store every month for those who can't afford our products. And so if that's you, you can sign up for our weekly emails to get notified when they come available. And in fact, we already have a number of them available because this month alone, we added $515 worth of free copies. So there's plenty there. If you would like one or more of the different titles that are there, patrons get access to all of our content in a modular format that we call the Layer, which I've just recently updated to improve the navigation and to improve just the overall experience. And there's all kinds of exclusive extras, including these adventures and new monsters and magic items. We had the Foundry VTT access to that I mentioned. Higher tiers have all kinds of added benefits, including having me run games for you and physical gifts mailed to you that we make in-house, custom gifts for you, like a surprise box each month. And you can check out the link in the show notes for all those details. Now, if you see this show being helpful, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more, wherever you're catching this, please subscribe. If you know people that need to hear this, please pass it on to them. And if you, like me, think everyone needs to hear this, then pass it on to your social media friends. And don't forget those podcast ratings. That is the #1 way to spread the word. So thank you so much for joining us to make lives better with tabletop games.